My name is Corinne Leland. I was 17 years old when my father decided my future was not mine to have. No daughter of mine needs an education, my father said. Then he ripped my college acceptance letter in half, right there at the dinner table, in front of my grandmother, my uncle, and my 14-year-old brother. That letter was everything: Penn State, a partial scholarship, 9 months of secret applications, late-night essays, and a school counselor who believed in me when no one else did. 9 years of cooking his meals, scrubbing his floors, and swallowing every dream I ever had. And he turned it into confetti on a dinner plate. I thought that was the worst moment of my life. I was wrong. Within 30 seconds, my grandmother did something that unraveled 20 years of my father's authority. And it all started with a piece of paper he didn't know existed. Before I go on, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely connect with this story. Drop your location and local time in the comments. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Now, let me take you back to the fall of my senior year, the week everything changed. The house on Maple Street looked respectable from the outside. 2-story brick, white shutters, a lawn Gerald mowed every Saturday morning at exactly 7:15, not because he enjoyed it, but because he needed the neighbors to see him doing it. Image mattered to my father. Control mattered more. Inside, every square inch operated on his terms. The thermostat stayed at 64 degrees in winter, because he said anything higher was wasteful. The television remote lived on the armrest of his recliner. His channel, his schedule. Dinner was served at 6 sharp, and God help you if the salt wasn't on his side of the table. And that table, a heavy oak dining table with carved legs and a water stain in the shape of a crescent moon near the corner where I always sat, had been in the house since before I could remember. My grandmother bought it when she first furnished the place, 22 years ago. But my father called it my table, the way he called everything in that house my. This is my house, my rules. I heard that sentence every week, sometimes twice, sometimes before breakfast. I was 10 years old the first time he handed me a spatula and told me to make eggs. I burned them. He didn't yell. He just stared at me with this flat, quiet look that was somehow worse than yelling and said, "Your mother could do this in her sleep. Figure it out." So I figured it out. Eggs, then pancakes, then full dinners, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, the rotation he liked. I did the laundry. I scrubbed the bathroom tile on my knees. I packed my little brother Tyler's lunch every morning and walked him to the bus stop. I was not his daughter. I was his housekeeper. I just didn't have the words for it yet. He called it his house. But I'd learn later that he never owned a single nail in it. My mother's name was Diane. She had brown hair that curled at the ends without trying, and a laugh that made you feel like you were in on some wonderful secret. I know this because I was 8 years old when she died, and those 2 details are the ones I've held on to the tightest. Breast cancer, stage 3 by the time they caught it, stage 4 by Christmas. She was gone before the tulips came up in the yard she'd planted the spring before. After the funeral, my father changed. Or maybe he didn't change. Maybe the grief just burned away whatever thin layer of softness had been keeping the rest of him hidden. He moved through the house like a man sealing off rooms. First the photos came down. Every picture of my mother, off the walls, off the fridge, off the mantel, packed into a cardboard box and shoved into the garage behind the snowblower. I snuck one out. A small snapshot of her holding me at the county fair, cotton candy stuck to my chin, both of us laughing. I kept it pressed inside my biology textbook like a secret. Then the rules tightened. No mentioning Mom at the table. No crying where he could see it. No asking when things would feel normal again. "Your mother had dreams too," he said to me once when I was 12 and made the mistake of telling him I wanted to be a nurse someday. "Look where that got her." He said it the way you'd comment on the weather, just a fact, like dying was something she'd done on purpose to inconvenience him. I found out years later, from my grandmother, in a sentence she started and then stopped, looking away, that my father had forbidden my mother from going back to school. Diane had wanted to finish her nursing degree. He said no. She stayed. That was the first time I understood that silence in our family wasn't peace, it was obedience. My daily routine was simple, the way a cage is simple once you stop rattling the bars. 5:30, alarm. 5:45. Downstairs, coffee started. Eggs on the skillet. Gerald. I started calling him that in my head around 15, though never out loud. Liked his coffee black with exactly 1 sugar, and if I forgot the sugar, he'd push the mug to the center of the table without a word and wait for me to fix it. 6:15. Tyler's lunch packed, his backpack by the door. 6:30. Gerald's lunch packed too, because apparently a 47-year-old man couldn't manage a sandwich. 7. Bus stop with Tyler. 7:40. School. 3 o'clock. Home. 3:15. Dishes from the morning. Laundry if it was Monday or Thursday. Vacuuming if it was Wednesday. 5:30. Start dinner. 6. Serve. 6:45. Clear the table. Wash everything by hand because Gerald said the dishwasher was a waste of water. 8. Homework. Finally. 9:30 or later. Bed if I was lucky. He checked the fridge to make sure I'd shopped right. He checked my phone. A flip phone so old the hinge was held together with tape to make sure I wasn't wasting time. He didn't allow extracurriculars. No clubs, no sports, no friends over. You've got responsibilities, he'd say, like I was 40 with a mortgage instead of 17 with a geometry test. I know what you're thinking. Why didn't I leave? I was 17. I had $11 in a mason jar under my bed. I couldn't sign a lease, open a bank account, or enroll myself in school without a guardian. My Uncle Russell was too scared of Gerald to take me in, and if I fought back, if I made noise, Gerald had one threat that silenced everything. Keep it up, and I'll make sure your grandmother never sees you again. She was the only person left who made me feel like a person. So I stayed quiet. I stayed useful. I stayed. But that September, something arrived in the mail that changed everything, and it almost didn't reach me. Here's something Gerald didn't know. I applied to college. Not openly, not proudly. In secret, like a crime. It started with Mrs. Margaret Horner, my school counselor, a no-nonsense woman in her mid-50s with reading glasses on a beaded chain and a file cabinet she called the vault. She'd noticed things. The way I flinched when someone raised their voice in the hallway. The way I never stayed after school, never signed up for anything. Always rushed home like I had a curfew ticking down in my blood. One afternoon in January of my junior year, she asked me to stay for a minute. She closed her door, and she said, "Corinne, what do you want to do with your life?" No one had asked me that, ever. She helped me with everything. SAT prep books she lent from her own shelf. Application fee waivers. Essay drafts written during lunch in her office, the door closed, my handwriting shaking. We used the school's address as the return address on every application because Gerald checked the mailbox the way a warden checks cells, every day, without fail. But I also told my grandmother. One evening, from the phone in Mrs. Horner's office, I called Eleanor and told her everything. She listened without interrupting. Then she said, "Use my address as a backup. I'll watch for the letters." It was Eleanor who got the letter first. Penn State. Accepted. Partial scholarship. $12,000 a year. I'd need about $8,000 more for tuition and living, but it was real. It was possible. I cried in Mrs. Horner's office when Eleanor called to tell me. Quiet tears, the kind I'd trained myself to cry. No sound, no mess. "Don't worry about the money or the house," my grandmother said on the phone. "Just trust Grandma." I didn't understand the part about the house. Not yet. Eleanor said to tell Gerald at Sunday dinner. She'd be there. "Bring the letter," she said. "I'll handle the rest." What I didn't know, what made my stomach drop when I found out later, was that Gerald had already gone behind my back. He'd contacted Rosie's Diner on Route 9 and arranged a job for me starting the week after graduation. Waitressing. 30 hours a week. He'd even signed my name on the application himself. He wasn't just keeping me from college. He was building a wall around my entire future brick by brick while I was still inside it. Sunday, 6 o'clock. I set the table the way I always did, Gerald's plate at the head, his water glass on the right, his napkin folded into a rectangle because he said triangles looked sloppy. Tyler's place to his left, Uncle Russell's across from Tyler, my grandmother's chair at the other end, nearest the kitchen, where she always sat, close to the door, I realize now, like someone who always kept an exit in sight. I'd cooked the usual rotation: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans with garlic. Gerald's menu, Gerald's schedule, Gerald's rules. The smell of rosemary filled the kitchen, and I remember thinking how strange it was that something could smell like home and feel like a trap at the same time. Eleanor arrived at 5:45. She wore her camel cashmere coat, the one good thing she owned, the one she wore to every family dinner like it was armor. She kissed my forehead at the door, squeezed my hand once, and set her leather handbag, structured, dark brown, worn soft at the handles, on the floor beside her chair. I didn't notice how carefully she placed it. I didn't notice that it was heavier than usual. Gerald was in a good mood. That should have been my first warning. He came downstairs whistling, clapped Tyler on the shoulder, even said, "Smells good," as he sat down. A compliment so rare I almost dropped the serving spoon. I knew why he was cheerful. He thought next week I'd be filling ketchup bottles at Rosie's. His plan was working. My plan was under my seat cushion in a sealed envelope. I waited until everyone had their plates, until Gerald took his first bite and nodded, the way he did when the food met his standards, until the table was quiet. Then I pulled out the envelope. "Dad," I said. My voice was steady, but my hands weren't. "I got accepted to Penn State, with a scholarship." I held the envelope out to him like an offering, like a child showing a drawing to a parent and praying they'll put it on the fridge. Gerald set down his fork. He looked at the envelope the way you'd look at something dead on the side of the road, with a kind of distant, vaguely offended curiosity. He took it, pulled the letter out, read it slowly, his eyes tracking left to right, his jaw tightening with each line. Then his face went red. Not angry red, darker. The red of something that had been pressurized too long. He tore the letter in half. The sound, that clean, sharp rip, cut through the kitchen louder than any shout. He tore it again, 4 pieces. Then he dropped them onto his plate, right next to the chicken bones and the smear of mashed potatoes. "No daughter of mine needs an education," he said. Not yelling. Worse. Level. Absolute. Like he was reading a rule off a wall. "You're staying right here." He looked around the table. At Tyler, who stared at his plate. At Russell, who suddenly found his green beans fascinating. At Eleanor, who hadn't moved. "Nobody encourages this nonsense," Gerald said. "She's got a job at Rosie's starting next month. That's the end of it." I looked down at the pieces of my letter. 9 months of work, the late nights in Mrs. Horner's office, the essay I'd rewritten 11 times, the SAT I studied for using a prep book with someone else's notes in the margins. All of it sitting on a dinner plate soaking in gravy. Then Gerald leaned back in his chair and said the thing I will never forget. "Your mother had the same stupid ideas. Wanted to go back to school, be a nurse." He picked up his fork again. "And where is she now?" The table went silent. Even the clock on the wall seemed to hold its breath. He turned my mother's death into a weapon. Again. I wanted to cry, but I knew. The way you know fire is hot, the way you know ice is cold. That crying in front of Gerald meant losing. So I swallowed it. I sat there with my hands flat on my lap, and I swallowed it whole. Gerald wasn't done. He turned to my grandmother. She was sitting perfectly still at the end of the table, her hands resting on either side of her plate, her face unreadable. "This is your doing, isn't it?" he said, pointing his fork at her. "Filling her head with ideas. You've always coddled her, just like you coddled Diane." He said my mother's name like it tasted sour. "And look how that turned out." Eleanor said nothing. "Clear the table, Corinne," Gerald said without looking at me. "Now, this conversation is over." I stood up. Reflex. 9 years of muscle memory carrying me toward the sink before my brain could catch up. My hands were already reaching for his plate when I heard my grandmother's voice. "Sit down, Corinne." Quiet. Not loud. But something in it stopped me cold. A firmness I'd never heard from her before, like a door locking from the inside. Gerald's eyes snapped to Eleanor. "Ma, stay out of this. This is my house, my daughter, my decision." Uncle Russell shifted in his seat. "Gerald, maybe we should talk about this." "You don't get a vote either," Gerald cut in without breaking eye contact with Eleanor. Then he turned back to me. And while we're at it, I called Penn State on Thursday. Tried to withdraw your application myself. Told them I was your father, your guardian. His lip curled. They said they needed your signature, some policy nonsense. He leaned forward. So, you're going to sign that withdrawal form tonight. Right here at this table, in front of everyone. That was his real plan. Not just the letter. He wanted me to kill my own future with my own hand, witnessed by my own family. A public execution of the only dream I had left. My grandmother sat still for exactly 30 seconds. I know, because I was counting. 30 seconds is longer than you think when the only sound is a clock ticking and your own heartbeat and the faint scrape of Gerald's fork against porcelain because he had actually gone back to eating, that confident that he'd won. 1 Mississippi. The refrigerator hummed. 10 Mississippi. Tyler stared at the torn pieces of my letter like he was trying to put them back together with his eyes. 20 Mississippi. Uncle Russell's hand was wrapped around his water glass so tight his knuckles were white. 30. My grandmother set her napkin down. She folded it, neat, precise, placed it to the right of her plate the way she always did, like even this small act deserved dignity. Then she pushed her chair back and stood up. She moved slowly. Not frail, deliberate. She walked to the coat closet by the front door and took out her camel cashmere coat. She put it on, one arm at a time, and buttoned it at the waist with steady hands. Gerald looked up from his plate. Where are you going? Dinner's not over. Eleanor walked back to the table. She stood behind her chair. She looked at my father, not through him, not past him, but directly at him, the way you look at someone you finally stopped making excuses for. And she said 2 words. Pack her bags. Gerald laughed. A big laugh, a real laugh, the kind that comes from the belly and fills a room, the laugh of a man who believes the world is organized exactly the way he arranged it. Pack her bags, he said, still grinning. And send her where? With what money? My grandmother didn't answer. She reached down, unclasped her leather handbag, and pulled out a stack of papers held together with a single staple. What she put on the table next was the reason my father had been living like a king in a castle that was never his. It was a deed, a property deed, notarized, stamped, filed with the county recorder's office, every line crisp, every signature verified, and at the top, in black ink that 22 years hadn't faded, one name, Eleanor M. Leland, sole owner, not Gerald and Eleanor, not the Leland Family Trust, just her, one name, one woman, one signature. This house has been in my name since 2002, Eleanor said. Her voice didn't waver. I bought it with your father's life insurance money and my savings after he passed. I let you live here rent-free because you were grieving and you had 2 children who needed a roof. She paused. But I never, not once, signed this house over to you, Gerald. There is no transfer. There is no agreement. The deed is mine. It has always been mine. Gerald's smile collapsed. Not all at once. It went in stages, like a building losing floors. First the corners of his mouth, then the light in his eyes, then his entire posture, sinking an inch in the chair he'd been sitting in like a throne. He looked at the deed. He looked at Eleanor. Then he forced out a laugh, smaller this time, thinner, the laugh of a man looking for the punchline. So what? He said. You're going to kick me out? Your own son? I'm giving you a choice, Eleanor said. Corinne goes to Penn State this fall, with my financial support. You let her go, you support her, and you keep living here. She tilted her chin slightly. Or you fight this, and I call my attorney tonight. Uncle Russell leaned forward and picked up the deed, reading it. His eyebrows climbed his forehead. He set it down without a word, but the look he gave Gerald was one I'd never seen from him before. Something between shock and a quiet, long overdue recognition. Tyler's mouth was open. He was looking at me, then at Eleanor, then back at me, like he was watching the world rearrange itself. And me? I sat there staring at that piece of paper, and one thought repeated itself over and over. 20 years. He told us this was his house. He made every rule, controlled every corner, decided who ate, who spoke, who mattered. All of it built on a lie he never bothered to verify. Gerald's face cycled through something I'd never seen before: confusion, then fury, then a hard, brittle composure, like a man patching a cracked wall with his bare hands. He pushed the deed to the side of the table. "You think a piece of paper scares me?" he said. "I've been maintaining this house for 20 years. 20. I paid the electric, the water, the gas. I fixed the roof when it leaked. I replaced the furnace in 2019. He jabbed his finger against the table. I put my sweat into these walls. You think any court would just hand it to you?" He was reaching. I could see it. He was building a case the way he built everything, loud and fast, hoping no one would check the foundation. Eleanor didn't respond. She stood there in her cashmere coat, hands clasped in front of her, and let him talk. "And even if the house is yours, Ma," Gerald spread his hands wide like he was being reasonable, like this was all just a misunderstanding between adults. "I'll fight it. I'll get a lawyer. You really want to drag your own family to court?" That was his card. Guilt. The same tool he'd used on me for 9 years, on my mother before that, probably on Eleanor before that. The threat wasn't legal, it was emotional. "You'll be the one who broke this family." Then he turned to me. His voice dropped, low, almost gentle, the way a trap sounds when it's being set. "Tell your grandmother to stop this circus, Corinne. You know this is your home. You want to destroy this family over a school?" He wanted me to choose, family or future, loyalty or freedom. The same impossible choice he'd been forcing on every woman in his life for as long as I could remember. My grandmother didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She reached into her handbag again. It was a flip phone. Old, silver, small, almost identical to the one Gerald had given me, the one he tracked and monitored. But Eleanor's was hers, paid for with her own money, listed under her own name. She pressed one button. Speed dial. The kitchen was so quiet I could hear the tinny ringing through the speaker. 1 ring, 2 rings, then a click. "Hello, David? It's Eleanor Leland." Her voice was conversational, almost pleasant, like she was confirming a lunch reservation. "I need you to begin the process we discussed. Yes. The 30-day notice." A pause. "Yes. Tonight." Another pause. "Thank you, David. I appreciate it." 40 seconds. She closed the phone and slipped it back into her handbag. Gerald stared at her. The laugh was gone. The bluster was gone. What was left was something rawer. The look of a man hearing a sound he can't identify in the dark. "You're bluffing," he said, but his voice cracked on the second word. "Gerald," Eleanor said, and for the first time, I heard something almost like sadness in her tone. Not for herself, but for him, for the version of her son she'd spent 20 years hoping would show up. "I have never bluffed a day in my life. You have 30 days, or you let Corinne go to college." She picked up her handbag. "Choose." "Let me explain something." David Mercer was Eleanor's real estate attorney. She hadn't called him on impulse. She'd consulted him 2 weeks earlier, right after Gerald had ripped up the first piece of mail from Penn State, an orientation packet, right in front of me at breakfast without a second thought. That was when Eleanor began preparing the paperwork. The eviction documents were already drafted. She was just waiting for Gerald to cross the last line. He crossed it with confetti on a dinner plate. Eleanor walked to the front door, then stopped. She turned back. Not to Gerald, but to me. "Pack a bag, honey. You're coming home with me tonight." I stood up. Not fast, not dramatic, just up. The way you stand when you've decided something and your body finally agrees. "Sit down," Gerald said. His chair scraped back. He was on his feet now, too, one hand flat on the table, the other pointing at me. "You're not going anywhere." I looked at my father. Not at his hand, not at the floor, at him. And for the first time in 9 years, I didn't drop my eyes. "I've been sitting down for 9 years, Dad. I'm done." His mouth opened, but nothing came out. I genuinely think, it was the first time anyone in that house had said no to him and meant it. I walked upstairs. My room was small, the smallest bedroom, the one with the window that didn't lock properly, and the ceiling stain shaped like a boot. My backpack, a faded JanSport I'd had since freshman year, was already half packed. Mrs. Horner had told me months ago to keep a go bag ready. Just in case, she'd said. At the time, I thought she was being dramatic. She wasn't. I grabbed it. Clothes, toothbrush, the SAT prep book, my journal. Then I reached into my biology textbook and pulled out the photo of my mother at the county fair. Cotton candy, laughter, a version of my life that cancer and Gerald had erased. I slipped it into my jacket pocket, against my heart. Tyler was standing in the hallway, 14 years old, still in his baseball jersey, his eyes red. Corinne. I pulled him into a hug. He was almost my height now. I'm not leaving you, I said into his hair. I'm just leaving this. I went downstairs. Gerald stood at the bottom of the staircase blocking the door. If you walk out that door, he said, and his voice was shaking now, don't come back. I walked past him. He didn't move to stop me. I think some part of him knew, had maybe always known, that the only thing keeping me there was the lock, and the lock had just been changed. Eleanor had the car running, headlights on, engine humming, the passenger door already open. Behind me, I heard Russell's voice, quiet, almost apologetic, but clear enough to carry. I'll bring the rest of her things tomorrow, Ma. It was the first time Uncle Russell had ever gone against Gerald in front of the family. It would not be the last. I got in the car. I put my backpack on my lap. I didn't look back at the house. Eleanor pulled out of the driveway, and for the first time in 9 years, Maple Street got smaller behind me. I want to pause here for a moment. If you've ever had to leave a place you thought was home, whether it was a house, a relationship, or just a version of yourself you'd outgrown, you know what that drive felt like. If this story is hitting close, tap that like button so I know you're here. And if you want to know what happened Monday morning when the eviction notice landed on my father's doorstep, stay with me. This story isn't over yet. Eleanor's apartment was small. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a kitchen with a window that overlooked the parking lot of a laundromat. It smelled like lavender and lemon dish soap and something warm I couldn't name but recognized. Safety, maybe. The absence of eggshells. She gave me the bed. I told her I'd take the couch. She told me she wasn't asking. I've slept on worse, she said, pulling an extra blanket from the hall closet. Your grandfather snored like a diesel engine for 41 years. A sofa is an upgrade. I lay in her bed in the dark, staring at the ceiling, and the voice in my head was not my own. It was Gerald's. You just destroyed your family. You're selfish. Who do you think you are? 9 years of his voice, embedded in me like splinters. I could leave the house, but I couldn't leave that. A knock on the door. Eleanor came in with a mug of warm milk and sat on the edge of the bed. She didn't say anything for a while. Then, your mother would be so proud of you tonight. That broke me. Not Gerald's cruelty, not the torn letter, not the walk past him at the bottom of the stairs, but those 7 words, spoken quietly in a small bedroom that smelled like lavender. I cried, not the silent, controlled tears I'd trained myself to produce. Real crying. The ugly kind. The kind I hadn't allowed myself since I was 8 years old. Eleanor held my hand and let me finish. Then she told me something I wasn't expecting. She'd opened a savings account in my name when I was 10. $200 a month from her teacher's pension, every month, for 7 years. It's at $16,800, she said, as matter-of-factly as if she were reading a grocery receipt. Between that and the scholarship, you'll be fine for the first year. We'll figure out the rest. I wiped my face. Grandma, why didn't you do this sooner? She was quiet for a long time. Long enough that I thought she hadn't heard me. Because I kept hoping he'd change, she said. That was my mistake. Gerald didn't wait long. The calls started the next morning. Eleanor's phone rang at 7:15. She looked at the screen, silenced it, and went back to making toast. It rang again at 7:20. 7:31, 7:45. She let everyone go to voicemail. Then he called me. The first time his voice was soft, almost unrecognizable. Come home, sweetheart. We can talk about this. I was upset. I said things I didn't mean. Let's sit down like a family. I didn't answer. I just listened. 2 hours later, the second call. The sweetness was gone. "You're making a fool of yourself, Corinne. The whole town is going to know about this. You want people talking? You want that on you?" The third call came at 9:40 that night. His voice was cold and flat, the Gerald I knew best. "If you don't come back by Friday, I'm cutting you off completely. No phone, no insurance, nothing. You'll have nothing." He called Uncle Russell next. Russell told me later, quietly, almost ashamed, that Gerald said, "You help them, you're dead to me. I mean it." On Tuesday, Gerald showed up at my school. He walked into the front office and demanded to see me. The receptionist, a woman named Linda who'd worked there 20 years and did not care for men who raised their voices in her lobby, told him he needed an appointment. He didn't have one. Mrs. Horner was alerted. She pulled me out of third-period history and walked me to her office through the back hallway. "He's in the building," she said, her hand on my shoulder. "You're safe. He can't get past Linda." That evening, Gerald posted on Facebook. I saw it because 3 classmates sent me screenshots within an hour. "My daughter ran away because her grandmother is manipulating her. She's a confused teenager being used by a bitter old woman. Please pray for our family." 47 likes. 12 comments saying they'd pray. 6 saying, "Stay strong, Gerald." He was rewriting the story with himself as the victim. And in a small town where everybody knew everybody, that story traveled fast. Small towns are beautiful until you need one to mind its own business. Within 3 days, the version of events circulating through our zip code bore almost no resemblance to reality. Eleanor was the villain, a controlling grandmother overstepping boundaries, turning a teenage girl against her loving, hard-working father. Gerald was the victim, a widower, a single dad, a man who'd sacrificed everything and was being punished for it. A neighbor named Doris, the kind of woman who attended every funeral in town whether she knew the deceased or not, called Eleanor on Wednesday. "How could you do this to Gerald?" she said. "He lost his wife. Now you're taking his daughter? That poor man." Eleanor, to her credit, didn't hang up. She said, "I appreciate your concern, Doris. This is a family matter," and ended the call politely enough that Doris couldn't repeat anything damaging. At school it was worse. Kids I barely knew stopped me in the hallway. "Is it true your grandma kicked your dad out? I heard you ran away. Are you okay?" One girl from my English class said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "My mom says your dad is heartbroken." I smiled. I nodded. I kept walking. But each comment was a small cut, and by Thursday afternoon, I had enough cuts to bleed. Gerald knew exactly what he was doing. He texted me screenshots of the Facebook comments, the sympathy, the prayers, the outrage on his behalf. Then one line, "See? Everyone knows what you're doing is wrong." And for one terrible moment, sitting in Mrs. Horner's office with the door closed and my backpack at my feet, I believed him. Maybe I should just go back, I thought. Maybe he's right. Maybe this isn't worth tearing everything apart. And then, Monday morning, something arrived at my father's door. The process server was a man named Phil who drove a gray Honda Civic and had the emotional range of a filing cabinet. He knocked at 8:15 in the morning. Gerald opened the door in his work boots and undershirt, a mug of coffee in his hand, coffee he'd made himself for the first time in over a week, badly, according to Tyler. Phil handed him the envelope. Gerald signed. Phil left. Inside, a 30-day notice to quit, issued pursuant to 68 Pennsylvania Consolidated Statutes Section 250.501. Property address, 114 Maple Street. Owner, Eleanor M. Leland. Occupant, Gerald R. Leland. The notice informed Gerald that he had 30 days to vacate the premises or face a formal eviction action filed with the Magisterial District Court. It was real. It was legal. It was happening. Gerald called Eleanor immediately. I know because I was sitting at her kitchen table eating cereal when her phone rang and she put it on speaker. "You can't do this to your own son!" His voice came through distorted, the way sound warps when someone is screaming into a small microphone. "I gave you a choice, Gerald," Eleanor said. She was holding her coffee with both hands, looking out the window at the laundromat parking lot. "You made yours." She hung up. Gerald went looking for a lawyer. In a town our size, the options were limited. The first attorney he called, a woman named Janet Polk, declined. Conflict of interest. She'd already consulted with Eleanor on a separate matter years ago. The second lawyer, a man 2 towns over, agreed to review the case. After looking at the deed, the tax records, and the complete absence of any lease or written agreement, he told Gerald the truth. If the deed's in her name and there's no lease, you're a month-to-month tenant at best. She has every right to do this. That same evening, Tyler called me from his friend's phone. His voice was small and careful, the way you talk when someone is sleeping in the next room. "Dad hasn't cooked once since you left," he whispered. "He doesn't know where the plates are." That night, Eleanor and I sat on her sofa with mugs of chamomile tea, and she told me the truth. The whole truth. The version she'd been carrying for decades. "Your grandfather," she began, and stopped. She took a sip, started again. "Harold was a good provider. People liked him, but behind our front door, he was a different man. He decided what I wore, where I went, who I could talk to. I wanted to teach. I had the degree, I had the certification, but he said a wife's place was in the home." She looked at her hands. "I lost 15 years waiting for him to change his mind." She didn't teach until Harold died. She was 51 years old on her first day as an elementary school teacher. 51. When I saw Gerald doing the same thing to Diane, I thought I was watching a rerun of my own life. Eleanor set her mug down. "I told your mother to leave," she said. "I can't. He'll take the kids." Eleanor's voice thinned. She was right, probably. And then she got sick, and it didn't matter anymore. "The house." She explained it plainly. After Harold died, his life insurance paid out. Not a fortune, but enough. Eleanor combined it with her teaching savings and bought the house on Maple Street outright in 2002. Gerald had just lost Diane. Tyler was 5, I was 8. He needed stability, and she gave it to him, rent-free, no questions asked. But she never transferred the deed. "I told myself it was because the paperwork was complicated," she said. "That was a lie. The truth is, I knew. I knew who Gerald was becoming, and I kept that deed because somewhere in the back of my mind, I believed that one day I might need it." She was right. It just took 20 years. She reached under the sofa cushion and pulled out a manila folder. Property tax records, every year, all 22 of them. Her name on every receipt. A printout of an email from David Mercer confirming the title was clear. Then she said something that made the room go very still. "There's one more thing. Your mother left you a letter." I asked about the letter. Eleanor shook her head. "Not yet, sweetheart. When you're ready." I wanted to argue, but something in her face told me she'd been guarding that letter for 9 years, and she wasn't going to hand it over at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday. She'd know the right moment. She always did. So instead, we prepared. David Mercer's office was above a hardware store on Main Street. He was a calm, gray-haired man in his 60s who spoke in complete sentences and kept a framed photo of his golden retriever on his desk. Not the kind of lawyer you see on television, the kind you actually need. He walked us through everything. The deed was unambiguous. Eleanor was the sole legal owner. Gerald had no lease, no rental agreement, no written promise of any kind. Under Pennsylvania law, he was what's called a tenant at will, someone occupying property with the owner's permission, which the owner could revoke with proper notice. "The 30-day notice has been served," David said. "If he doesn't vacate, we file for eviction with the Magisterial District Court. A hearing will be scheduled within 10 days of filing." He looked at me. "How old are you, Corinne?" 17. I turn 18 in July. He nodded. "Your grandmother can serve as your financial sponsor for Penn State. Once you're 18, your options expand further." Mrs. Horner, meanwhile, had been working the other side. She contacted Penn State's admissions office to confirm my acceptance was still active. Gerald hadn't managed to withdraw it because they required my signature, which he didn't have. The financial aid office walked us through the numbers. Eleanor's savings plus the scholarship covered year 1, with room to apply for additional aid. Mrs. Horner helped me file a FAFSA with a dependency override, supported by a letter she wrote herself documenting my home situation. For the first time, my future wasn't a dream someone could tear up at a dinner table. It was a file, a folder, signatures, stamps, and numbers that added up. For the first time, I wasn't asking for permission. I was filing paperwork. Gerald did not go quietly. He found a lawyer, a man named Craig Weiss from a town 40 minutes away, the kind of attorney who took cases on contingency and asked questions later. Within a week, Weiss filed a response to the eviction. Gerald claimed adverse possession and cited a verbal agreement in which Eleanor had allegedly promised to transfer the house upon his retirement. There was no such agreement. Eleanor told David Mercer this with the same calm she applied to everything. "I never said that. Not once. Not ever." But Gerald wasn't relying on truth. He was relying on delay and intimidation, two things he'd been perfecting his entire life. Weiss sent a letter to Eleanor suggesting she was being unduly influenced by her granddaughter. The letter used the phrase potential elder exploitation and hinted that Gerald might contact the Department of Aging if Eleanor didn't reconsider. So Gerald did exactly that. He called the county's Area Agency on Aging and reported that his 72-year-old mother was being financially manipulated by a minor. A caseworker came to Eleanor's apartment on a Thursday afternoon. Her name was Beth, and she was thorough. She interviewed Eleanor alone for 45 minutes. She reviewed the deed, the bank records, the correspondence with David Mercer. She asked Eleanor 3 times, in 3 different ways, whether she was being pressured by anyone. Eleanor answered each time the same way. "I am of sound mind. I have my own attorney, and I am making this decision freely." Beth closed the case the same day. "No evidence of exploitation," the report read. "Client is alert, oriented, and represented by counsel." That Friday night, Gerald showed up at Eleanor's apartment at 11 o'clock. He pounded on the door hard enough to rattle the chain lock. "You're going to regret this, Ma!" he shouted. "Both of you!" Eleanor called the police. They arrived in 9 minutes. Gerald was escorted to his truck and given a verbal warning. A report was filed, incident number and all. He drove away. I stood in the hallway behind Eleanor, my hand on the wall, and told myself the truth. He wasn't fighting for his family. He was fighting for control, and he was losing it. But there was something Gerald didn't know, something my grandmother had been carrying for 9 years. Tyler called on a Saturday morning, whispering so fast I had to ask him to slow down twice. "I found something," he said. "In Dad's desk, the bottom drawer, the one he keeps locked. He left the key in his jacket and I looked." What Tyler found was a manila folder. Inside it, every piece of college mail that had ever been sent to me. Not just the Penn State acceptance. There were letters from Temple University, a brochure from the University of Pittsburgh, a SAT score report I'd never seen. All of it intercepted from the mailbox over the past year, shoved into a drawer and locked away. My father hadn't made a rash decision at a dinner table. He'd been systematically erasing my future for months. Tyler took photos with his friend's phone and sent them to me. I sat on Eleanor's couch and scrolled through image after image. Envelopes with my name on them, opened, read, and hidden by the man who was supposed to protect me. And then, at the bottom of the folder, Tyler found something else. A congratulations card, addressed to me, postmarked 8 years ago. The handwriting was unfamiliar. The return address was in Philadelphia. It was from my Aunt Patricia, my mother's sister. The woman Gerald told me wanted nothing to do with us after the funeral. The woman he said had moved on and forgotten about you. She'd written, "Corinne, honey, congratulations on starting high school. Your mama would be so proud. I think about you every single day. Love, Aunt Patty. 8 years. He'd kept her from me for 8 years. I don't want to be like him, Corinne," Tyler said, and his voice broke on my name. Gerald did not vacate the house. 30 days came and went. He stayed on Maple Street like a man who believed that stubbornness was the same as a legal right. So Eleanor and David Mercer filed for formal eviction with the Magisterial District Court, and a hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks later. The courtroom, if you could call it that, was a small room in the municipal building off Route 6. Fluorescent lights, wood-paneled walls, an American flag in the corner that leaned slightly to the left. 5 rows of wooden benches for spectators, a raised desk for the judge, no jury, just people and paper. Gerald sat on the left side with Craig Weiss. He was wearing a dress shirt, light blue, ironed, the first time I'd ever seen him in anything but flannel or a work polo. khaki pants with a sharp crease. But his work boots peeked out beneath the cuffs, scuffed and familiar, and somehow that detail made me sadder than anything. Eleanor sat on the right with David Mercer. She wore a navy blazer over a white blouse, her silver hair in a low bun, her posture the kind of straight that comes from decades of standing in front of a classroom. She looked like exactly what she was, a retired teacher who had done her homework. I sat in the first row behind Eleanor. My hands were in my lap. My backpack was at my feet. Behind us, Uncle Russell, who had driven 40 minutes to be there. A few faces I recognized from town, people who'd seen the Facebook post, heard the gossip, and come to watch. The court clerk, a young woman with a laptop, recorded everything. The room was small, but it had an audience. And audiences change the way people behave. Or, in Gerald's case, the way they reveal themselves. Judge Morrison entered, a woman in her early 60s, silver reading glasses, no nonsense. She sat down, opened the file, and said, "Let's begin." Craig Weiss went first. He spoke quickly, building Gerald's case like a man stacking cards on a windy day. Gerald had maintained the property for 2 decades. Gerald had paid utilities. Gerald had invested significant sweat equity into the home. There was, Weiss argued, an implied agreement that Eleanor would eventually transfer ownership. Judge Morrison listened. She did not interrupt. She took notes. David Mercer stood up. He was quieter than Weiss, slower, and somehow more devastating for it. He presented the deed. Filed with the county recorder's office in 2002, Eleanor M. Leland, sole owner. He presented 22 years of property tax receipts, all in Eleanor's name. He presented a title search confirming no liens, no transfers, no co-owners, no encumbrances of any kind. "Your Honor," Mercer said, "the deed is unambiguous. My client is the sole legal owner. There is no lease, no written agreement, and no evidence, written or otherwise, of a promise to transfer. Mr. Leland is, at best, a tenant at will. The 30-day notice was properly served." Judge Morrison turned to Gerald. She removed her glasses. "Mr. Leland," she said, "can you present any written document, a lease, a contract, a letter, anything at all, that shows your mother agreed to transfer ownership or grant you a permanent right to reside in this property?" Gerald looked at Weiss. Weiss looked at the table. It was understood," Gerald said. He leaned forward. "She's my mother. Mothers don't need a contract with their sons." Judge Morrison put her glasses back on. "Mr. Leland, this court deals in documents, not assumptions." She reviewed the file for another 60 seconds. Then she ruled. Eleanor had the legal right to evict. Gerald was ordered to vacate within 15 days, reduced from 30 because, as Judge Morrison noted, Gerald had already been given the original 30-day notice and had chosen to ignore it. Gerald shot to his feet. His chair scraped back against the tile floor loud enough to make the clerk flinch. "This is insane!" he shouted. "She's doing this because of a girl who wants to go to school?" The room went silent. Every person on those wooden benches heard it. Russell closed his eyes. The court clerk's fingers hovered over her keyboard. Judge Morrison stared at Gerald over her glasses for a full 3 seconds before saying, "Sit down, Mr. Leland." He sat. But the words were already out. And every person in that room understood exactly what kind of man was saying them. "Did you hear what my father just said? In a courtroom, in front of a judge, in front of witnesses. Because of a girl who wants to go to school. A girl. Wanting to learn." That was the emergency. If that sentence hit you the way it hit me, drop a comment below. I read every single one. And if you're in the middle of your own fight right now, you're not alone. Subscribe and come with me to the end. The next part is the part I'll never forget. The courthouse parking lot was half empty and too bright. One of those crisp fall mornings where the sun hits the asphalt at an angle that makes everything look overexposed, like a photograph with the contrast turned up too high. Gerald stood next to his truck, a rusted F-150 with a cracked taillight and a faded bumper sticker that read "Support Local Plumbers." He had his keys in his hand, but he wasn't moving. He was looking at Eleanor and me as we came down the steps, David Mercer holding the door behind us. "You took everything from me," Gerald said. His voice was different, not loud, not mean, just hollow. A man standing in the rubble of something he'd built, not understanding that the foundation had never been his. Eleanor stopped on the bottom step. She looked at her son, her only son, and I saw something move across her face that I'd never seen before. Not anger, not satisfaction. Something heavier. The weight of a woman who knew she was right, and wished she didn't have to be. "I didn't take anything, Gerald," she said. "I just stopped giving." Russell walked up beside Gerald and put a hand on his shoulder. Gerald flinched but didn't pull away. "You can stay with me," Russell said, "as long as you need. But you need to let Corinne go." Gerald didn't answer. He opened his truck door, got in, and drove off. No goodbye, no last word. Just the engine and the gravel and the shrinking red of his taillights. I watched him go. I waited to feel something triumphant, some rush of justice, some cinematic swell. It didn't come. What came instead was quieter. Not joy, not sadness, just space. A vast unfamiliar openness where his voice used to be. On the drive home, my phone buzzed, a number I didn't recognize. "Corinne? It's your Aunt Patty. Tyler found my card and called me. I've been trying to reach you for 8 years." I called her back from Eleanor's kitchen, sitting on the counter with my feet dangling, the phone pressed so hard against my ear I could feel my pulse in my cheekbone. Patricia's voice was warm and cracked at the edges, like a mug you loved too much to throw away. She told me everything. She'd sent letters, birthday cards, Christmas packages, every year, for 8 years. Gerald told her, once, on the phone, in a tone she said she'd never forget, that Corinne and Tyler don't want to hear from you, and that she should respect the family's wishes. Then he blocked her number. She told me she'd contacted a lawyer once about visitation rights, but since she wasn't a legal guardian, and Gerald wasn't technically denying access, just intercepting. There wasn't much she could do without proof. "I never stopped thinking about you," she said. "Not one day." Patricia lived in Philadelphia. She was a registered nurse at a hospital downtown. A nurse, the same career my mother had wanted and Gerald had crushed before it started. The coincidence sat in my chest like a stone. "Your mom talked about you constantly," Patricia said. "She wanted you to have everything she couldn't. She used to say, 'Corinne's going to be the one who makes it out.'" I was crying again, freely this time. No swallowing, no hiding, no watching the door. "Come visit before school starts," Patricia said. "Philly's only 3 hours from Penn State. You'll have family close." Family. The word felt different now, not a chain, but a net. The night before I left for Penn State orientation, Eleanor sat me down on the edge of her bed. She was holding a small wooden box, cedar, no bigger than a shoebox, with a brass clasp that had gone green with time. "I was waiting for the right moment," she said. "I think this is it." She opened the box and handed me an envelope. It was cream-colored, soft at the edges from years of being held and put back, held and put back. My mother's handwriting on the front. Round letters, careful, the kind of penmanship that belongs to someone who was taught by nuns. "For Corinne, when she's ready to fly." "She wrote it during treatment," Eleanor said. "She knew she might not." She stopped, pressed her lips together. "She gave it to me and said, 'Give it to her when she needs it most.' I've been carrying it for 9 years." I opened the envelope with hands that would not stay still. The letter was 2 pages long, written on lined notebook paper, the ink slightly smudged in places, tear stains I realized later, some hers and now some mine. She didn't write about Gerald. She didn't write about cancer. She didn't write about regret, or at least not in the way I expected. She wrote about me. She wrote about the morning I'd made her breakfast in bed when I was 7, burnt toast and orange juice with pulp I'd tried to strain through a paper towel. She wrote about the time I'd memorized every constellation on a placemat from a diner and recited them to her in the backyard. She wrote about the way I laughed, which she said sounded like bells being shaken loose. And near the end, in handwriting that had grown unsteady, she wrote the line I carry with me everywhere. "Don't let anyone tell you what you're worth, especially not the people who are supposed to love you." I read the letter 3 times, the first time through tears, the second time through something deeper, the third time because I wanted to hear her voice, and this was the closest I would ever get. Eleanor was crying too. Quietly, the way the women in my family had always cried, like sound was something we'd been taught to ration. "She asked me to wait until you were ready to fly," Eleanor said. "I think you're ready." I held the letter against my chest and breathed, and for the first time the ache of missing my mother didn't feel like a wound. It felt like a compass. Let me tell you what happened next, because the numbers matter. Numbers don't lie, and they don't change their story when someone starts crying. Gerald vacated the house on Maple Street 8 days before the court-ordered deadline. He moved into a one-bedroom apartment above a dry cleaner on the other side of town. $750 a month, the cheapest he could find. He'd been living rent-free for 20 years in a house valued at approximately $185,000. The math on what that cost him to lose is the kind of calculation that keeps a man awake at 3 in the morning. He still had his plumbing job. He still had his truck. But the thing he'd lost, the kingdom, the throne, the illusion of authority built on a piece of paper that was never his, that couldn't be replaced with overtime. Eleanor kept the house. She didn't move back in. Instead, she rented it to a young family, a couple with 2 kids and a dog, for $1,200 a month. That income went directly into a second account earmarked for my education, tuition for year 2 and beyond. Tyler stayed with Uncle Russell during the school year. It wasn't ideal, but Russell was steady, and he'd finally stopped being afraid of his brother. Tyler started seeing a counselor at school, not because anyone forced him, but because he asked. The town gossip machine, which had once churned in Gerald's favor, slowly reversed. People found out the truth in pieces: the deed, the eviction, the intercepted mail, the Facebook performance. Nobody apologized to Eleanor. Small towns don't do that. But the invitations to Gerald's side of the narrative quietly stopped, and Doris the neighbor was seen bringing Eleanor a casserole on a Thursday afternoon without explanation. He didn't lose his daughter because I left. He lost his daughter the night he ripped up that letter. 2 months into my first semester, my phone rang at 8:15 on a Wednesday evening. I was in my dorm room, textbooks spread across my bed, a half-eaten bag of pretzels on the nightstand. The number was Gerald's. I almost didn't answer, but something in me, not forgiveness, not obligation, something I still don't have a word for, made me pick up. "I saw your name on the dean's list," he said. His voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it, smaller, like it was coming from a room that had gotten too big for one person. "I looked it up online. Your mother, she would have liked that." I closed my eyes. It was the first time he had mentioned my mother without using her as a weapon, and I didn't know what to do with that. This tiny, late, insufficient acknowledgement from the man who'd spent a decade teaching me that my dreams were a waste of his time. "Thank you for saying that, Dad," I said. "But I'm not ready to talk yet. When I am, I'll call you." I hung up. I sat in the silence of my dorm room and listened to my own breathing. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel relieved. I didn't feel the satisfaction people expect you to feel when the person who hurt you finally shows a crack in their armor. I just felt clear. Forgiveness isn't something I owe him. Maybe it'll come one day. Maybe it won't. But my education, my future, those were never his to take. Penn State in October is the kind of beautiful that earns its keep. The maples on the quad burn orange and red, and the air smells like wood smoke and possibility. And everywhere you look, there are people carrying books and coffee, and the quiet assumption that they belong here. I belonged here. My dorm was a cinder block box on the 3rd floor of East Halls, shared with a girl named Rachel, who talked in her sleep and kept a collection of succulents on the windowsill she'd named after Supreme Court justices. She was strange and kind, and the first friend I'd made based entirely on who I was, not who I was related to or what I could do for them. I declared pre-nursing. Not because Aunt Patricia was a nurse, not because my mother had wanted to be one, but because somewhere between the burnt toast and the biology textbook, and the 9 years of taking care of everyone but myself, I'd realized I was good at caring for people. And I wanted to do it on my own terms, for people who actually needed it, in a place where it counted. Eleanor called every Sunday night at 7. We talked about her week, my classes, the tenants in the Maple Street house, the weather, normal things. She never brought up Gerald unless I did. Tyler FaceTimed every Wednesday. He was growing. His voice was changing. He'd joined the track team at school, the first extracurricular a Leland kid had been allowed to do in a decade. Aunt Patricia invited me to Philadelphia for Thanksgiving. I went. She made my mother's stuffing recipe. I didn't cry, I just ate 2 helpings and asked for the recipe, and Patricia smiled like I'd given her something she'd been waiting years to receive. On my desk in the dorm, between a second-hand laptop and a stack of anatomy flashcards, I kept 2 things: the photo of my mother at the county fair and her letter, pressed flat inside a clear plastic sleeve so the ink wouldn't fade. Nobody here told me I can't, and that still felt new. I'm not going to stand here and tell you what to do with your life. I'm 20 years old. I'm still figuring out my own. But I can tell you what I learned. I learned that silence isn't loyalty. My grandmother was silent for 20 years because she loved her son and kept hoping he'd become the man she raised him to be. That silence cost my mother her dream. It almost cost me mine. Eleanor would be the first to tell you, waiting isn't patience when someone is drowning. I learned that power doesn't have to be loud. My father shouted, he slammed, he controlled every room he walked into by making everyone afraid to breathe wrong. My grandmother sat quietly at the end of a dinner table and changed my entire life with a deed, a phone call, and 6 words: pack her bags and choose. She didn't save me with magic. She saved me with paperwork and patience. And I learned that leaving isn't the same as giving up. I didn't abandon my family when I walked out of that house with a JanSport backpack and a photo in my pocket. I left a system that was designed to keep me small, and the moment I stepped outside, I started growing. If you're in a house where your dreams get torn up at the dinner table, I hope you find your Eleanor. Or maybe you are someone's Eleanor. And if you are, don't wait as long as she did. That's my story. Thank you for staying until the end. It means more than you know. If this reached you, hit that like button and subscribe. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. I want to hear your story. Drop it in the comments or send me a message. Every story matters, especially the ones that almost didn't get told. And if you want to hear another one, check the link in the description. There's a story there that's been waiting for you. I'll see you in the next one.